Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I'm delighted to be here in front of you, and I'm not just saying that. For the record, my name is Rob Nose, and I'm the state representative for House District 42, which consists of inner southeast and a little slice of northeast Portland. They don't like to be forgotten, so I have to mention them. In my first term, one of the most gut-wrenching days for me on this committee was when people came and literally spilled out their purses and their shopping bags with the various medications that they take to stay alive, to function as parents, or to go to work. And they would describe the struggles that they face to afford these medications and the trade-offs they make in that process. I'm lucky in that for the most part I've had good health and good health insurance. These folks were clearly working class and middle class people trying to be productive members of our state who desired to contribute, yet they lack jobs with good health insurance, or they're on exchange plans with very high deductibles and hefty cost-sharing mechanisms once that insurance benefit actually kicks in. This problem was really well illustrated by a story about Gloria Rogers in a recent Portland Business Journal article. Now, Gloria was 4.5. She was diagnosed with a rare genetic mutation that caused seizures. She was hospitalized for 2 weeks. Her condition continued to deteriorate, and she lost the ability to swallow and eat by mouth. After she was airlifted to Portland, doctors diagnosed her with infantile spasms and prescribed, I hope I'm saying this right, Acathar, which is a frontline treatment for this syndrome. Now, there was only one problem. This drug cost $35,000 a vial. Now, at first, her parents thought this medication was some sort of experimental treatment, or it had just been recently invented. In fact, the drug has been around since the 1950s, and it was off patent. In 2001, Questar Pharmaceuticals bought the rights to Acathar, which at that time cost $40 a vial, and they raised the price 85,000%. I'm going to say that again, 85,000%. Now, in 2015, we had 2 bills in this committee, one to cap copays on exchange plans for specialty drugs to no more than $100 for a 30-day supply, and another to require transparency or reporting to the state for any drug that cost over $10,000 a year as to why. Was it marketing or R&D costs or something else? Neither of these bills were moved out of this committee, as the chair wisely decided to marry those two things together, form a work group, and attempt to solve the problem of the growing expense of medications more holistically. So since August of 2015, I've been chairing a work group that met monthly, composed of representatives from across the healthcare industry to try to get at this problem, the expense of medications. The work group was made up of Representatives Kennemer and Lively, and advocates from the pharmaceutical industry, insurance companies, inpatient groups, in the hopes of crafting legislation to make prescription drugs more affordable. This has not been an easy problem to solve. The way drugs are developed and the way they are paid for makes solving this problem very hard. Let me start with a few slides that I think illustrate the problem. Now, the first slide that's up on the screen shows a trend line over a decade showing the skyrocketing costs of medications, particularly those that are deemed specialty drugs. Specialties are usually newer drugs to the market, often biologics. They treat cancers or chronic conditions, and they are special because they are new or expensive or because of the way they are administered. Now, this next slide shows 5 common medications where the price has increased a lot since 2007, way beyond inflation. This next slide juxtaposes regular inflation with pharmaceutical and medical inflation, right? You can see the trend line, the blue line on the bottom, and then pharmaceutical and medical inflation. Those are the bar graphs. Now, this slide is a little busy, but it reveals why this is a growing problem. 1% of the drugs utilized today are 50% of the expense of all the drugs that are used. And this is only going to continue. Mr. Chair, I believe you whispered to me at one of those meetings I was chairing, based on a trade show that you attended in the spring of 2016, that we're going to be, and I remember you saying this, overwhelmed in the next few years with these kinds of medications coming onto the market. Now, this next slide shows the cost problem again, although it does it differently with the amount of money spent on medications over almost 40 years, and what the spend projections are for medications if we do not do anything about the costs. And this last slide, how many of you have heard about Hep C drugs Sovaldi? It debuted at $80,000 for its 12-week course of treatment, and at least to its credit, it is a cure. But this is not the only drug that is like this in the pipeline. And with that kind of cost, that is what this slide is attempting to show. That's it for the slides. We can turn the lights back up. Now, when it came to trying to develop legislation, us legislators came up with 3 criteria. We wanted ideas for a bill that would do something to help patients save money and reduce their costs, do something that does not cause the overall premium to rise very much, and get drug manufacturers to be more reasonable about what they charge. House Bill 2387 addresses these 3 criteria by doing the following. It calls for transparency about what drives the cost of pharmaceuticals with regard to research and development, marketing, how much profit is needed, as well as coupons and patient assistance that's offered, so that we can gain some insight into why drugs are priced the way that they are. It puts a dollar amount, a copay cap, on what consumers have to pay for each 30-day prescription of $100 once the bill is amended. The current cap in the bill is more aggressive, but probably not workable. Finally, it creates a rebate system, and we're going to have to amend this a little as well, but the intent is this. If a drug manufacturer charges a price for a drug in Oregon that is higher than the average price charged among the next top 5 nations for that drug among the member nations of the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, the difference between that average price and what is charged to Oregon will be rebated to the insurers. Now, that is a bit of a mouthful. What I'm trying to say is that if you charge more in Oregon than you charge in other developed countries, you'll have to pay a rebate to the payer for the difference. That is so that premiums won't increase because of the copay cap. After all, is it really right that Oregonians are charged more than what people in Sweden or Canada or France are charged? Now, obviously, look behind me, this bill is not without its detractors. And not surprisingly, drug manufacturers, I believe they're opposed to this bill. It does not set a price. It requires a rebate under certain conditions. Healthcare providers in Oregon have been trying to keep healthcare costs reasonable, but they can't do it if the pharmaceutical industry does not change the way that it prices medications. This is a very aggressive bill, and we're among one of the first states in our country to go at this problem in this manner. Now, I believe the critics are going to say some of the following, that this is a windfall to insurance carriers. I've been assured by the Department of Consumer and Business Services that that is not true, despite the full-page ad that has been taken out for the 2nd day in a row in the Oregonian, which I can't help but reflecting on the fact that the transparency that we require for the insurance industry makes it possible for them to cite the amount of money they're claiming that the insurance industry earns in this state. The rate-setting process in this state is that if there is a windfall that the carriers experience as a result of the rebates that are required by this bill, that has to be reflected back in the rates that they develop or given to the plan purchasers, in addition to the copay benefit that they will receive. And if that is in question, I believe there are staff here from DCBS who can offer some insight into the rate-setting process. And I'm going to have, if not, I've got an email that I'll have posted to OLIS that explains this in a little more detail. You may hear that the free market will or is addressing this problem. And I would call your attention to an investigation that was done by KGW where they showed 100 drugs that went up in almost every instance more than 71% over a 4-year period. So they've got a great little thing on their website. It's very interactive. You can drag a cursor over a drug and see what the price is. So here's one, tetracycline. It's an antibiotic, okay? Since 2012 to 2016, it went from 7 cents to $8.54. Now that's a generic, that doesn't sound like a lot of money, but that is a 12,100% increase in 4 years.
That's per pill.
Per pill. Here's another one that maybe some people have heard of, acyclovir. It's for cold sores. And it's also generic. Per pill, it was 15 cents in 2012, and now it's 65 cents. And that's a 323% increase in 4 years. 100 different drugs that they looked at that are experiencing this. Usually a free market brings costs down. You'll hear that innovation will be stifled and the regulation reporting is burdensome. I don't think the critics of that bill are entirely true about that. The financing of industry research is different than the marketing and mass production and selling of the product once you have something that is actually workable. Often, biotech companies that develop these drugs sell their company or their discoveries to one of the larger, more established companies, and then the whole financing scheme changes. Now, I do have a letter, I don't think it's on OLS yet, we'll submit it, that'll be on the record from one of these companies that has come forward and said this bill, it's not going to hurt their ability to generate financing and that something needs to be done. If there's a way to have reporting and transparency and do it in a way that is not as burdensome for small startup companies, I'm open to hearing some of those suggestions. You may also hear that drugs that cost a lot are anomalies and not that commonly prescribed. The list compiled by KGW that I submitted on OLS is only drugs that have gone up 71% or greater in 4 years. 100 drugs is hardly just a blip or an isolated case, in my opinion. Now, you will also hear that regulation reporting, the transparency part of this bill, is burdensome. The bill asks for the following only if you charge more than $10,000 a year for the drug. What is your average wholesale price? A rationale for that price, including costs of development, research, clinical costs, trials, manufacturing costs, safety and efficacy testing costs, desired margin, marketing budget, and how you are conducting marketing. Is it direct to consumer versus direct to provider? That might be burdensome, but I'm guessing that any project manager or person in charge of that drug's development knows how to answer this. Maybe they have to spend a day gathering that info up and putting it in one report if they don't already have it, but I'm guessing they have it for their investors. Mr. Chair, thank you for tasking me with chairing this work group. It was a very good hazing. I learned a lot. I know this is a very aggressive bill, first of its kind, but it is absolutely what is needed. I also think it's important to understand that I didn't get a lot of meaningful ideas from the pharmaceutical industry about what they would be willing to do to control cost. Their only answer to me was that they're not the problem, and that we should focus on other areas that are cost drivers like hospital costs. I'm going to say on the record I was disappointed they weren't here on Wednesday to hear me talk about that issue. I'm hopeful they'll be helpful in encouraging our state to look at a rate-setting process for hospitals. In the meantime, I'm still open to listening to other approaches and ways to implement the bill that are not as burdensome. Perhaps your hiccup idea will be the right approach.
Representative Knowles, I want to comment that whether the folks on your work group agree with the final product that you've come up with or not.
We didn't.
They universally admired your work on that committee, and I think you did a fantastic job, and we all owe you big time for the sweat and effort that went into the project.